Cheers. I'm currently having drinks. It's a Saturday night and trying to do my part and stay home. The pandemic has been raging around the world. Cases have been surging, really, all parts. And it really is such a calamity. The amount of deaths globally, especially in certain parts, has been tragic. Not to mention the impact it's brought to many of us. And as I'm thinking about this, I've also seen these news footages of certain parts of the world now where people are hoarding. And I've also seen that in my country, but people go to these convenience stores and just fighting over these groceries and amenities. And it's just rather sad. It's a chaotic scene. Seeing stuff like this really reminds me of some of the philosophers I've read. Some of them are very pessimistic and reductionist. In particular, I think about this writer, this author, William Golding, this philosopher, who famously wrote Lord of the Flies. I'm not sure if you guys have read this book, but it's a great story because it tells a tale of, and I'll sum it up for you for those that haven't read, but it tells a tale of this plane crash of school children. It was a school trip and there were no adults alive, just the children. They survived, the class of children, and they wanted to get off the island, so they wanted to make smoke signals, but they had to wait as well to get rescued, so they had to survive. Very quickly, immediately, almost following the crash, they instituted a type of a society with order, a democracy actually, and so they delegated what everyone had to do, but also in the same amount of time, very quickly, it just devolved into anarchy as everyone started to really look out for themselves. There were power struggles, a lot of fighting. By the time they were rescued by a naval ship, the adult that finally came onto the island to rescue them, he was really shocked to see that the island had devolved into such chaos. It was totally scorched in a sense. And I think Golding really in this story is trying to present the idea that even with children who are so innocent and not even adults, they will devolve into such chaos and such acts of greed and selfishness and conflict that it is in our nature to be like this, especially in the face of adversity and calamity. When bad things happen, that's when order goes away. We reveal our true selves, and apparently it is very, very ugly. And I've always found that to be a very dark interpretation of human nature, especially from Golding. And in a way, I don't blame him as well. He's probably seen a lot. He fought in a war. But at the same time, I read this other book not long ago. It's called Humankind. It's written by Rutner Brennan. And in this book, in the second chapter, just by chance, he talks about this investigation he did. Apparently, in 1966, an Australian fisherman who was off the coast of the Tonga Islands, which is somewhere around Fiji, and he was near this isolated island called Ata, which was in the middle of nowhere, essentially. And as he was fishing around this isolated island Ata, he noticed some anomalies about the vegetation on Ata. It looked like it had been burnt, and in the area there were no wildfires, so that was very strange. This was a deserted island. So he took out his binoculars to have a better look, and then he saw, to his absolute shock, that there were a bunch of children, on the island waving frantically at him. So he pulls his boat closer, and eventually the children dived into the water, and one of them boards his ship very quickly as he swam up to it, and he was frantic. He told Peter that he was part of a group of boys who had been shipwrecked on the island of Ata for more than 15 months, more than a year. And he was very disheveled, long hair and everything. But otherwise he looked like he was in great health, and he looked like he was perfectly sane. He spoke perfect English. And so the first reaction from Peter upon meeting this frantic boy was really disbelief. He thought it was a prank. So in reaction, he called the authorities, the coast authorities of Tonga Island, just to ask whether there were any missing boys. And emotionally, they told Peter that indeed there were boys who were missing from the island for more than a year. In fact, they had thought these boys had died. They even had funerals. So they were, of course, delighted, extremely jubilant that these boys were alive, and the rescue party came. And as these boys were rescued, the authorities questioned them. How did you survive on this deserted island, which barely had any resources? It was deserted, only had vegetation and some animals, but how did you survive without any adults for more than a year? It was incredible. And apparently the boys in their recount, they told everyone that they just worked together. They delegated among themselves resource gathering, setting up shelter, and really trying to survive as best as they could. One of the most amazing things about this actual incident was that one of the boys, when they were shipwrecked, on the initial impact, he was severely injured, his leg. So when he was sent to the hospital and they were examining all these boys, that injured boy, his injury had actually healed perfectly because the boys tended to the wounds, and the doctors were just amazed that these boys were capable of this. Why I think this story is so powerful is because although Lord of the Flies is fiction, in the actual incident, an actual account, these boys with the exact same setting, they were wrecked on a deserted island. They went against our assumption. They did not break down into chaos and anarchy and all forms of selfishness and irrationalities. They actually worked together and they survived together through their unity. And that is such a beautiful thing. It really gives you a lot of hope. It really challenges the notion that our nature is really one of chaos, that we are capable, even in the face of adversity and calamity, to pull ourselves together and be in unity and bring order to the sorts of chaos that we're facing. Now, I was so fascinated by this that I decided to look into other stories of shipwreck, of the same sort of situation with Lord of the Flies, and I found two accounts from 1860, just one single year. In the 1800s, which is really the height of naval circumnavigation, that's when the world was really exploring the seas. It was really perilous because the ships we had back then were just not really built to be very resilient against some of the forces of nature. So apparently in 1860, on two separate months from two different ships coming from two different locations, two ships, the Grafton and the Invercold, on different months, they crashed on the Orkney Islands, which is an archipelago off the coast of New Zealand. And with the Grafton, during its initial crash, immediately the crew and the captain responded. They tried to stay calm. It was a dire situation of a sinking ship, but they salvaged in a very efficient way all the resources that they had, and they decided to really keep it in order and systemize it so they can ration it carefully. Eventually, with the resources they had and those more they found, they built shelters. They delegated people to hunt and gather food, others to also build more shelters and really establish a form of society. They even had Bible classes and other activities to keep themselves sane. And ultimately, beyond all odds, they were able to build another boat of sorts, and they escaped, and they survived. Yet, 2 or 3 months later, the Invercold would also get shipwrecked, I think 30 kilometers from that location. And in the midst of the adversity, there was a great sense of apathy. They decided to act in total difference. It was all men for themselves. Chaos broke loose. A lot of men began looting and hoarding all these resources that they could. They hid it from each other. They were really out to protect themselves. There were lots of infighting. There was even cannibalism. And when they were found subsequently, only 2 of the 35 men crew survived. Almost all of them perished. I think these 2 powerful accounts show us how in the face of adversity, we really have a choice to act. The important thing is, it isn't in our nature to act in a chaotic, selfish, greedy, man against man fashion. We are also able to act in unity, in order, and really be able to form ourselves in a social way and tackle the adversity. And we can see the starkly different fate that is in store for us depending on the course of action we choose. But it is against the reductionist view of human nature where we are just by nature brutish and by nature chaotic and anarchic and selfish and greedy, which is a view of many philosophers. And the important thing to know is that it really is our unity that is our advantage, and our nature is actually one of unity. You see, a lot of people like to point to evolution theory and this idea of survival of the fittest. But actually, oftentimes the idea of survival of the fittest is actually misinterpreted. Even the term itself, survival of the fittest, was not actually coined by Charles Darwin to explain this theory. It was actually coined by Herbert Spencer in his interpretation of Darwin's work. In my own reading of The Origins of Species by Charles Darwin, he also goes into great lengths to talk about how one of the key reasons for the success of human evolution is not that we have some special biological advantage, that we're born with something extra, at least our species dating back, is really in our capacity to act in unity, to cooperate, to form these social groups and actually tackle the adversities of evolution together. It is this thing, this ability to unite, the ability to form as these united and cooperative social groups that has allowed us to evolve so successfully and become the master species of today. So all of that to say that it is in not only history but also biology that we see it isn't in our nature to be chaotic and extremely selfish or brutish and really be anarchic. Especially in the face of adversity and unity, that is when we really have to let our natural ability to unite and act in unity to shine through.